can you describe the story of Becky Shaw very briefly for the audience?
Becky Shaw really is about a date that goes awry, essentially. This family has just lost a father. Max is an adopted son. The daughter in the family, Susanna, and Max have a very close relationship. And she sets him up on this date. And it sort of is the kickoff for the rest of the play, the sort of demise, maybe, of this family.
What are some of the elements of this play that drew you to it as a director?
I love how mean these people are. I'm a huge, lots of times people like to give me plays about women, nice women, and I've always, I enjoy the sort of David Mamet's and the sort of Oscar Wilde, and and I think that there's a little bit of both those things in this play. I think that these people are somewhat reprehensible, but not dismissible. And for some, I feel like there's something about listening to these people. There's a kind of truth that they speak that is sort of horrifying, but seductive. I'm also very interested in Gina's fascination with this 19th century novel and this sort of class issue, the sort of class, the social climbing women in some of these novels, for example, Vanity Fair, obviously. And that was a dimension I felt that, upon reading it, or actually I saw it before. I saw it in New York before I knew anything about that, and I found it quite a fascinating play. But when I heard, when I sort of read things that Gina had said and heard her sort of what she was basing it on, it added a really interesting dimension that has sort of, I think, expanded my vision of it. One of the central arguments is sort of, you need to be with someone who's your match, And frankly, this is something that my parents have always said, actually, growing up. That you marry someone they would term it, marry with someone with your own background. And that sort of, I think, is an umbrella way of saying your socioeconomic background, maybe your religious background, whatever that is. And it's sort of an interesting old-fashioned idea. And I feel like the language of the play, this kind of this is as one of the central themes. It reminded me a lot of the romantic comedies in the 30s and 40s, and I do think of this play as a romantic comedy. This is how I'm approaching the play. But in those movies, let's say Philadelphia Story or His Girl Friday, The Awful Truth, and they're all American. Those plays very much deal with the American class system. For instance, Philadelphia Story, it's very apparent that Katharine Hepburn will end up with her socioeconomic and it's not just socioeconomics, but it's also her level of intelligence and her way of speaking, literally, her language. And something in this play is that, Gina is brilliant in the way that she, that each character has a very specific way of speaking, and the actual the expletives that Max and Susanna sort of throw around, or the sort of gentle vocabulary of Andrew, et cetera, et cetera. It also distinguishes them in terms of, I think, social background as well. So in these movies, everyone sort of ends up with their appropriate, their match, no matter what kind of journey they take away from that person, they find their way back. So my approach to the play is, again, considering it as a romantic comedy and sort of taking cues from those movies.
For the set design, you mentioned both dioramas and paper dolls as being inspirations in your conversations with Mimi Leon. Can you tell us a little bit about what that process was like and how they came into play? Well,
I just sort of thought, again, going back to this idea of sort of, let's say a 20th century American class system, where people, yes, there are people who are born into it, but there's also a sense of making that everyone kind of that there may be a sense of starting out the same, but then your access to things, et cetera, is what sort of differentiates you class-wise. So I like this idea of starting with, you know, an empty room, really, and that each environment that we visit, I mean, somehow it is referred to. The first scene is a, you know, a 3-star hotel, but Susan calls it a 2-star hotel. Right. Our attention is drawn to the sort of accoutrements inside of a particular environment, so that we have the same frame for each scene, this white box that then gets dressed, much like a paper doll. The thing that I really love about this play is that there's such extreme views. I mean, so they're so polarized, really, and there's truth on both sides. But both extremes are incredibly seductive, and at any given moment you want to kind of, you know, subscribe to one or the other.